Welcome to another edition of Interruptions. I'm your host, Otis Smith. Today, we have another treat for you guys. We have a very prominent and brilliant man before us. He was drafted in the NBA in 1974 in the first round. He's also a lawyer, was assistant to the DA. He's also been a sports broadcaster. This man needs really no introduction. I love him. I always wanted to talk to him, and he's here today. I'm talking no other than the brilliant mind, Lynn Elmore. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, Otis. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you coming on the show. We don't take it lightly that you could have been doing anything else. So we appreciate when our guests come on. So I will tell you this, it's a thing I do now. I had to start warning people. So the show goes where you take it. I ask the questions, but wherever you take it, that's where it goes, because we don't have, any, agenda or where we want the show to go. So it goes where the guest takes the show.
Well, then I guess we're off on a journey then.
Correct. Yes, sir. My first question for you is, what was it like for you being drafted in 1974 in the NBA? Because when you were coming through, the draft wasn't all the glitz and glamour, the production like it is today. So for you and your family, what was that like at that time?
Well, in retrospect, it was pretty interesting by comparison to today. As you mentioned, it wasn't the big glorious production that it is today. In fact, it was just about a bunch of telephone calls. And strangely enough, although I guess I wouldn't call it strange, I
Mhm.
had taken off to go visit my girlfriend, who is now my wife.
All right.
Um, she was studying overseas in France,
Okay.
in a small town called Aix-en-Provence. And
Mhm.
she had been away for probably all of my senior year, all of her junior year. And I scraped up enough money to be able to fly over there to visit her. And we were staying in a bed and breakfast. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning
Okay.
that we get a knock on the door from the irate innkeeper telling me in French I've got a telephone call and who would be calling me at this time of day, this time of night. But it was the Washington back then, the Washington Bullets,
I
who
remember.
had drafted me. And I had heard earlier that the Indiana Pacers and the ABA were trading to San Antonio to get the rights to draft me as well. So, I had the opportunity to be drafted twice. I think that might have been the last year or the next to last year where there were two drafts held. Um, but that's what happened. And I found out, I said, oh, that's great. Here I was, I played it in the Bullets' backyard in College Park. And,
Hmm.
I had a lot of interaction with those players. I mean, obviously one of my idols was Wes Unseld. I wore number 41
Okay.
in his honor, through the overhead outlet pass as a rebounder in
Right.
his honor as well. We got to scrimmage those guys periodically when they would come down to College Park and play against us. So it was a treat. And Casey Jones was the coach at that time, and I truly admired him. And I really didn't have any idea that I was gonna be drafted by the Bullets. I mean, everybody talked anywhere from 2 to 20 as my draft slot. I was kind of an
That's a big
undersized.
slot.
Yeah, I was an undersized center, and I remember interviewing with Philadelphia 76ers, who had the second pick. The first pick was going to be Walton. Everybody put their
Right.
money on Bill, despite the fact that I got him, even though they beat us. I got him at UCLA, but that's a whole other story. But in the end, it was one of those things where I was happy to be there. Now, unfortunately, through negotiation, the NBA had a little bit of arrogance, and many of those teams didn't think that the ABA teams had the wherewithal to match their deals, so they kind of
Okay.
lowballed us. And the Pacers were one of the most financially solvent teams in the ABA, and the rumors about merger. We looked into that, my lawyer and I, and ultimately figured that they would survive a merger. And they offered me twice the number of years in security, twice the amount of money than the
Okay.
Bullets, and I would have been a fool not to take the Pacers offer, all things being equal. So, I kind of had a tear in my eye when I realized I couldn't play for the Bullets. Still in the state of Maryland, in my hometown, but the Pacers were a new adventure, so that's where I wound up my first couple of years in the ABA, and then we merged into the NBA.
So it still worked out.
Yeah, I mean, I got 10 years of professional basketball. I can't
Yeah.
complain about that.
How was it? What was the vibe? What was it like for you playing in the NBA in the 70s? I always tell people I was born in 71. And when I look back, like the 70s was just the coolest decade of all time. Like it was, it was the cool. So what was that like playing in the NBA, playing professionally in the 70s?
Well, I mean, you talk about a different vibe. There's no question that
Yeah.
the comparison between then and now is stark. Back in those days, we traveled commercially. So
Hmm.
that meant, we had to get online and ultimately, go through security when, people were hijacking planes. That's when the beginning of security started. And, we played in a lot of different cities that, had difficulty in arranging connections
Okay.
to flights. I mean, Indianapolis was a decent enough airport, but there were a lot of places where you had to connect. I recall us playing a game in Denver
Okay.
in the evening, 7 o'clock game, Mountain Time. Played. We finished around 9:30. By the time we got something to eat, we'd go back to the hotel. We'd be in bed by midnight, 1 o'clock, only to have to catch a 6 o'clock flight the next morning to go to another city to play that night. And obviously, gamblers knew exactly where to put their money, because when that happens too often, the road team is going to
Right.
suffer. And it did. It took a lot out of us. And I think that that's something that people fail to understand when it came to performance. That travel really takes a lot out of you. Unlike today, where not only do individual players get to charter their own jets because they make so much doggone money, but teams are chartering, so they get their teams out. You get to sleep in a bed the night before you play. A lot of things had that kind of impact. But that was one thing. The other thing was, it was still entertainment, not to the level it is now. We didn't have social media.
Right.
Guys weren't always followed to hang out, so we had a little bit of privacy in life.
Sure.
And there are also other issues that plagued the league. It was a time when people talk about people smoking weed back. I mean, today, and look upon it now as almost normal. Pain management, things like that.
Right.
It was done back then as well, but in those days it was criminal. So there are an awful lot of issues that guys had in some way, shape, or form. Let me see what else. Obviously there was the promiscuity. There was, that's the best. That's the only way I could put it.
Yeah.
But also from a competitive standpoint, there was a collegiality among guys. Everybody knew how hard we all worked.
Okay.
Everybody knew the difficulty it was in going from city to city. The physical play. People keep talking about the 80s and the 90s. They have no idea of how physical it was playing in the mid to late 70s and the early 80s. And so the game is so much different then. And when we played in the ABA, we had the 3-point shot, but we were more judicious in taking it as opposed to today,
Right.
where you take more threes and you do mid-range shots, which I don't care what the analytics say. That's just, to me, that's crazy basketball. It makes it hard for me to watch on that level, but that's just me.
No, I kind of agree with you in that sense of because I was a generation coming behind you, and I don't care if you were a little kid, as far as grade school, high school, whatever. If you was the tallest guy, you going in the paint.
Yeah.
That's just you going in the paint. And I remember it was so funny. A friend of mine and I'm 6'1", he's 6'2", he had me by an inch, and all our friends were shorter. So every time we went to go play pickup games, they want to stick us in the paint. And we were like, you do know we're actually nothing but guards. Y'all do
Yeah,
know that. So, but it was because they wanted you to use your height advantage,
right.
right?
Well, there
Whereas
was no
now,
reward. There was no reward for, a shot, because in those days you're only to get in two. So no matter how far
correct,
out you were shooting, you didn't get that extra point. And I understand the math, but to totally abandon the mid-range game,
it's crazy.
which puts pressure on the defense, which forces the defense to adjust, which and particularly playing in the paint also puts pressure on the defense.
Yes.
People keep criticizing paint play, and that's a lost art unto itself. But when you throw it inside, what do defenses do? They still adjust, they still react. And now you're creating opportunities for better 3-point shots, especially when you're successful inside the arc. I could go on and on about it, but those are some of the differences when you talk about playing the game. You worked harder, you had more skilled players inside the 3-point line, particularly in the post. And it was just a vastly different game. And as I said, like it or not, that's the way I view it. And I find this game a little bit harder to take. A lot of people think our game was too slow and too difficult to take, but that's the nature of change.
Well, I remember growing up. My uncle was teaching me the game, and you had to. I kind of equated back in the day, kind of to baseball a little bit, far as you had to think. It wasn't just
Yeah,
get the ball and go. You had to think, watch a man, make sure he's not cutting back door, because the ball was moving.
yeah,
It wasn't like give me the ball and get out the way. The only time you was that, and you remember when you played some pickup games, or even you playing at the highest level in the NBA, is when we need a bucket. Now, if we really need a bucket, yeah, you're going to your best player
absolutely.
to get, but that was the only time the ball wasn't moving like that.
Yeah, and the ball movement set up the opportunity for that individual to take somebody one on one. As I said, it's a team game, and the real essence of the game is, from an offensive standpoint, is getting the defense out of position.
Yeah.
That's what you want to do to create a higher percentage shot. And it just drives me nuts when I see guys driving to the basket, literally about to lay it up and turn down a 90-95% shot for a 35% shot for one extra point in the middle of the game.
Yeah. That's because when you think back when you were coming up and I was coming back, even on a fast break, remember you did the figure eight drill, you did the passing the ball, all those were for layups.
Yeah.
Now when you're on a fast break, you got to do it running to the corner. When
Yeah.
and it used to be everybody you had to get whoever had the ball was driving straight ahead. The wings, everybody was headed towards the basket. And now it's like dudes are going out to the 3-point line versus.
Yeah. They do it, especially if they have rim runners who are gonna, try and follow it up after that long shot. But I recall playing when I was playing for the Milwaukee Bucks.
Uh-huh.
We were running, a 3-man fast break
Right.
in practice, and I decided, because the defender had backed all the way up in the paint, I got hit on the wing, and was I supposed to drive in and lay it up and have a guy take a charge on me? So I pulled up about 10 feet and knocked down a bank shot.
Mm-hmm.
Coach Don Nelson blew the whistle, stopped, and cursed me out. Said, you got an advantage break, and you're pulling up taking, a jump shot instead of going in for a layup, because that was the philosophy back then.
Correct.
Today, knocking that shot down, I probably would have gotten yelled at because I didn't pull up behind the three to take the shot, as opposed to the 10-foot bank shot. But like I said, there's a difference
Things
in
change. Yeah.
philosophy. Yeah.
The times that you grew up in, did that shape you in a way that made you want to pursue law, becoming a lawyer, based on the era you grew up in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I grew up in a period where the civil rights movement was in
Yes.
full bloom. Having one parent from the South and a lot of relatives from the South, but also my other parent was from the North.
Hmm.
from New York. And, there's still issues with regard to school busing and integration, et cetera. And, I was right in the middle of it growing up in New York City, and traveling down south to visit relatives and such. And you see what was going on television. I'll never forget sitting home on a Sunday and watching on the evening news with my parents before Bonanza came on, or the wide world of color with Disney, to watch on the news, our folks getting brutalized by, Alabama and the Birmingham police
Sure.
with fire hoses, et cetera. And it just made me wonder, okay, what's life going to be like as you get older? And I also used to love watching TV. I was a big fan of Perry Mason
Okay.
and some of the lawyer shows, because they were the voice for the voiceless, the innocent, who were victimized by a system. And I said to myself, I'd like to be a part of that change. I like to be in the vanguard of change. I don't want to be on the sideline watching. And I thought that lawyers could be the voice for the voiceless, could provide power to the powerless, and combine that and Perry Mason with other lawyer shows that dealt with that stuff. And then as I got older, the war in Vietnam started to rage, and I hit right at home, because even in high school, I was a student council president in high
Okay.
school, and tried to lead our school in marching in a huge demonstration, and almost got kicked out of school for doing it. But nevertheless, I thought that it was important to have some type of activist involvement. And so it never left me. And
Gotcha.
even though, I started playing basketball as a sophomore,
Okay.
really organized basketball in the 10th grade. In the ninth grade, I fooled around a little bit,
Hmm.
because I was a baseball player,
Okay.
and I still love that game to this day. A lot of people look at me, kind of cross-eyed and say, how can you like baseball? But, like you said earlier, it's a thinking game. It's a game that, it involves strategy. It still involves athleticism and skill, but it
Yes.
involves some other stuff. And yes, it's slower. I'm not an instant gratification guy anyway. So, all those things put together, I love baseball, but, I grew so much taller than people I played baseball with. And
Right.
I had a PE teacher by the name of Howie Evans, who
Hmm.
was a writer for the Amsterdam News in New York City, and he was a substitute PE teacher, and
Okay.
kind of got to my insecurity and asked me, "Don't you want to play with people your size?" Because I was about 6'4", 6'5" in the ninth grade, and I said, "Sure, why not?" So he takes me down to this high school, and they're playing full court, in which I don't think I played much full court, if any. And
Okay.
so they go to the center jump, toss it up, and tip it, and they take off. And I'm still at half court, because I'm saying, okay, how, how do you guys know which way to run? You know,
Yeah.
and that tells you, how little of the game that I knew. But between my sophomore and junior year, played in the Rucker, got embarrassed, but also, utilizing athletic skills. I embarrassed some folks and made
Right.
all city my junior year. Between my junior and senior year, I was an All-American. But going back to your question about the law
Hmm.
staying with me, that was important. And that's why, I stayed very competent in high school, because I never thought about being a pro athlete. It wasn't until my sophomore year in college, after my team won the NIT, and we're playing in front of some of the Knicks and others, and we could hear some of their comments, that I thought, hey, maybe pro basketball wouldn't be a bad idea. But again, the focus was on someday being a lawyer. It's just that basketball happened to get in the way.
That's I mean, just listening to you and just listening to Kareem from afar, growing up, it's it's always been for me. It's like, what happened to the Kareem Abduls, the Lynn Elmores, where I can play a sport, right? Because I'm good at it. But what happened to the athlete that also thinks, you know, to say if something's wrong, it's just wrong. And if there's racism out there, right, it's going to affect you whether you playing in the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, no matter what sport you're playing, you're going to run into it. So you can't just want to deviate from it because you're a pro athlete.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a platform. And pro athletes have had a platform, and it's been used since sports became a thing in America, just used differently. And the reason I say that is because right now my current job is I'm a senior lecturer at Columbia University in the
Correct.
sports management department. And the picture behind you is part of an article I guess somebody wrote. But one of the courses I teach is athlete activism in social justice. And what we do is we trace, the voices of athletes and the actions of athletes in that activism, whether intended or not, from the time sports became a thing in America, which
Mm-hmm.
was, during Reconstruction and after, the Civil War. And some athletes did it intentionally, others unintentionally,
Right.
but nevertheless made a statement. A great example of that is Jack Johnson and his unmistakable blackness. But you mentioned a name that I neglected to say. That high school that I talked about that I went
Right.
tried out for happened
Yeah.
to be Power Memorial Academy, and that's where Lou Alcindor, now Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, went
Abdul-Jabbar.
to school.
Yeah.
We've got a couple things in common like that, but obviously his career is vastly different than mine, and so he never really had to feel as though that he needed another arena to
Mm-hmm.
be able to take his position. And I admired him from afar for such a long time. Once I got into that school, I'll never forget seeing his face at the place called the Summit that Jim
Okay.
Brown called,
Yes.
bringing Hall of Famers and great NFL players, along with terrific basketball players like Kareem and Bill Russell, together to listen to Muhammad Ali and help him make a case for his conscientious objector status as he was arrested and tried in Houston, and he was making a national statement about that. Ultimately, his case went to the Supreme Court, and he was vindicated.
Right.
But nevertheless, those are the things, and Ali is one of the centerpieces in my course when you talk about athlete activism. I mean, we talk about Jack Johnson, but also Jesse Owens, Joe Louis, certainly
Yeah.
Jackie Robinson, one of the major athlete activists who was more of an activist after his athletic career was Paul
Correct.
Robeson. And Paul Robeson is somebody I kind of modeled my life after because he did so many things and had so much impact. Whether he was an All-American football player, he also played baseball in the Negro Leagues for a while. He was a lawyer, got his law degree from Columbia University, but also was a concert singer as well
Correct.
as an actor. And finally, most importantly, he was a human rights activist, not just civil rights in America, but across the world. He'd go over to the United Kingdom and speak out for Welsh coal miners. He'd go to Africa and speak to South African diamond miners who were being victimized and exploited. And certainly here at home, he talked about things like lynching, like the total discrimination. And his voice was huge to the point where he sacrificed and, kind of lost his career towards the end. People tried to label him a communist, but nevertheless, he was steadfast in his beliefs. And we move on to Ali and Tommy Smith and John Carlos, people who were
Oh
seminal.
yeah. Yeah.
Wilma Rudolph, and certainly Althea Gibson, who was not necessarily out there to make a statement, but nevertheless her success made a statement. And Wilma Rudolph, denied, her hometown her presence in a parade for her after she won gold medals until they integrated
Yep.
that parade. I mean, there are just so many stories to speak to leading up to today, where the Williams sisters. I can just talk about so many athletes. Colin Kaepernick is like the central
Yes.
activist from an athlete standpoint today. And we talk about the who's a true activist versus
Mm-hmm.
who's a performative activist who don't take their position seriously enough and don't take the power that they have as to the extent that they should. One of the things that I've read before, that my man Howard Bryant in his book,
Mm-hmm.
his book, he says that the most powerful athlete in America, I'm sorry, most powerful employee in
Mm-hmm.
America is the Black athlete.
Yeah.
And when you think about the power that they hold, and if they thought about it collectively, if we had another summit, for instance, to discuss methods, it could have far more impact than they have now. But that's probably a grist for a whole other chapter, if you will.
No, I told you it goes where you take it, and I appreciate those thoughts. You know, I was fortunate enough to be, I always say, to be born when I was born, because I was
Mhm.
just coming, being removed, from the civil rights, what your generation did. I always, whether it was an athlete, whether it was someone like Dr. King or Malcolm X, others, right? I've always been at my I've always admired those who I had the pleasure to interview, the late A.D. King's wife. And you're talking about knowing that you could be killed for the stance that you're taking, which is the correct stand, but to continue to do it over and over and over again, right? I don't think people can really imagine what that's like, and the type of fortitude, internal fortitude that you have to be able to say, look, either I'm gonna stand for something, or I'm gonna fall for anything. You know.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, people need to see it to bring it home. What we've done in
Hmm.
many ways is we've denied our children, our generation, of understanding those people who put their lives on the line. It's ironic. This morning I was watching the documentary Evers, about Medgar Evers,
Mega Evers,
and
yes.
to recognize what a hero he was for us in Mississippi during that time. And it all began with him going to
With
war
him, yep.
and then coming back and realizing that nothing has changed, but he's given his life for this country and nothing has changed. He was going to give his life for a change in the movement and the NAACP, and his family, as well as he was, they were subjected to death threats every single day. Ultimately, somebody was successful in doing it. And it took a long while to bring that murderer to justice, but
Right.
nevertheless he was. But to recognize what Medgar Evers did on a daily basis to try to secure voting rights, to try to secure human rights for folks living in Mississippi, and to undergo that every single day, it brings home how important folks like that were. And today, as I said, those who have the power and the leverage are better suited. I'm just right now, I'm just a teacher at a university. There was a period of time when we had some power and we had some influence. And
Right.
and and during the 70s, you ask about, what it was like to play ball. It was in the aftermath of 1968,
Yep.
when I think was a seminal period where change seemed to begin to happen. After 68, the death of Dr. King, of Bobby Kennedy, the revolution in the streets, burning of cities, et cetera, people started to realize something needs to be done. Even Richard Nixon signed off on affirmative action as an executive order. Richard Nixon.
Yep.
So that they needed something serious to change. And so in that period aftermath of all of that, for 5, 6, 8, 10 years, it was kind of kumbaya, where everybody tried to get together, tried to do the right thing. And we played in that period. But then you get the 80s, and all of a sudden now, with the differences in wealth generation, and
Hmm.
greater poverty, finding ways to continue to segregate schools, focus on things other than um, other than building up our communities. All of a sudden we found ourselves in the same boat. The progress stopped. And athletes were outspoken then, but once again, not to the extent that they could be, because they didn't have the leverage. Today's athlete has tremendous leverage because of the dependence in those revenue generating sports, whether it's in college
Right.
or professional sports. In so many of those sports, they have such power to have influence on revenue generation of the people who own the teams, and recognizing that whether they can do it willfully or they can force them, they need to bring them in as partners in affecting change. I've always said, if that day when Jacob Blake got shot and the NBA
Hmm.
decided not to play that one day,
Right.
It sent shockwaves through the league, not only NBA, but in other leagues as well, because suddenly Major League Baseball didn't play that day,
Yeah.
and Major League Soccer didn't play that day. And I suspect that if NFL football was being played that day, they probably wouldn't have played that day. But imagine if they extended that. Imagine if they said, when you guys, you owners, you use your lobbyists to get better zoning laws, better
Right.
tax advantages, so many different things that would, affect you positively. Suppose you turn those lobbyists and the other, your donations to politicians, suppose you turn that towards the greater good, which would be changing, things like qualified immunity, criminal justice reform, wealth creation and generation
Right.
methods in Black and brown communities. Suppose you did all of that stuff, you turn those powers to focus on that. Until we see some agreement to do that, for that period of time, we're not going to play, knowing that it's only going to last for so long, because those owners, if you don't play, TV doesn't show the game, and the owners don't get paid from
You don't
TV
get paid.
because
Right.
TV's not getting paid from the advertisers. All of a sudden, as I said, there's shockwaves, and I'm sure that the leagues and the owners, when that one day took off, they started to think about that, and that's why you had so many concessions. But those concessions were so temporary. I just say again that these young people playing this game today, they need another summit. They need another Jim Brown to pull everybody together to talk about, okay, what's the strategy? How can we have impact? I've interviewed John Carlos in the
Mm-hmm.
past. I've interviewed others who agree 100% that that's what's necessary today. But, there's divide and conquer. So many people getting paid so much money. They don't necessarily want to miss a payday. And
Well, I was gonna ask you about that,
yeah,
because since you're already there, I'm flexible enough to move my questions around because you're
no,
already there. No, you're already there. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you about that, do you think, going in line with what you're talking about, that I think we don't have as an African American, as a Black community, we don't have a balance. And what I mean by that is that, okay, there's nothing wrong with getting paid. I'm all for the athlete getting
oh,
paid,
absolutely.
NIL, NBA, NFL, whatever. But I think we're missing, and I want your thoughts on this, we're missing a balance to say, okay, you can get in the league, but you may not play that long, whether it be injuries or you're just not that good enough. So now we're missing the whole education part. And so now when you talk about, like you said, having a summit, right? Or you know what, we're going to boycott, we're not going to play until we can get things in society change, right? So now you have another group that doesn't that wants to play, because they'll take, whether superstars or the stars of the league are not playing, they'll come in and take that money because they have nothing else to fall on, because they didn't try to do anything else. It was either locked in of, playing in the NFL, the NBA, or Major League Baseball, whatever the sport is, right? That you don't have the educational component to where, like yourself, you played 10 years in the league, but once you were through playing, you still had other things that you can do. Can you speak to that out of balance that we in?
Oh, well, I mean, unfortunately, that's part of the whole divide and conquer strategy. And, it may not be intentional, but certainly that's been the impact. And a lot of it has to do with entertainment and the ability of, wealthy people to continue to make money
Mm-hmm.
off of the exploits of Black folks particularly. And,
Mm-hmm.
and really what it comes down to is, um, the guys who are making the money have some impact, and they have spoken out to some extent, have done some positive things,
Mm-hmm.
but they haven't taken it to the level that they need to. Now, when you talk about, the guys who would come in and replace those superstars, I'm not sure it works like that, because people, the consumer recognizes talent.
Right.
And the pro level is not the same as college. See,
Right.
in college, if all the great players from high school decided to go play
Mm-hmm.
in some of these things like overtime elite, and some of these areas where they don't have to go to college anymore, just go play pro
Okay.
the G League elite, et cetera. I
Right.
still think fans would go to the games, the college games, because it's about the name on the front,
Right.
not the name on the back.
Mm-hmm.
But professionally, it's a different story. People are discerning enough to recognize real talent or not. So the guys who have the talent still have the leverage. And I still believe that also, there are some guys that just need an understanding and need to be prodded a little bit, need the sense of unity before they take a step out there. I also believe that the unions have a responsibility to help, recognize the import and the influence that, these superstars can have on the broader questions that we face in humanity today. And they should be helping them prepare for taking a work action if necessary. Because once again, as I said, you look at the owners, you look at the networks, you
Right.
look at others. In the aftermath of this most recent horrific mass shooting in
Oh
Texas,
man.
you've got teams coming out and speaking out and saying, hey, we've got to do something. And it is absolutely true. We have to do something. But in a bigger sense, there are a lot of other things we have to do as well. And you got to be able to get teams involved in that, because there seems to be a willingness, if the pressure is there, for folks to go out and utilize the powers that they have and focus those powers on change. But again, it's going to take that significantly leveraged and powerful
Gotcha.
athlete, employee, to be able to do that. And as I said, Howard Bryant's book, The Heritage, speaks to how players have done it, individual athletes have done it in the past. But again, the most powerful athlete in America is the Black athlete in football and basketball in particular.
Correct.
I think at some point in time, you've got to be able to convene some folks to talk about, not only gun violence overall, but particularly gun violence in our communities.
Correct.
We look at those mass shootings, and what the idiots like to compare it to is, well, look how many people get shot in Chicago. Well, there's a reason why that's happening. And you talk about history repeating itself. When underserved folks who were left out of society, on the periphery of society, the last time that happened on a mass scale was during immigration, during the turn of the 20th century. And those people happen to be Italian, Irish, and other ethnicities, Jewish. And that's where you had the Roaring 20s.
Right.
Prohibition. Today it's drugs, and back then it was prohibition.
Correct.
But you had the same mass murders, people killing each other, St. Valentine's Day massacres, all of that stuff.
Same
Why?
gangsterism, just changed a little. Right.
Yeah, the problem is, today with us, that gangsterism persists. It only happened for a while until those folks were assimilated into society and had a chance to be a part of society and get a stake in society. For folks of color, it's still difficult for too large a segment of that to happen. And hence, that's one of the offshoots, that type of violence. And you see when these mass murderers come out, and they're usually young people, young white males for the most part, who don't have a stake in society, are left on the periphery. We talk about their mental health, and every one of them has something like that in common. People need to wake up and understand that there are a lot of things we have to do to address, those types of people, and as individually and as a group, before we can be at peace. And right now, it's just too many special interests, too much money being thrown around, particularly by the gun lobby, that
they don't want to speak out again. Right.
Yeah, it just prevents that. And one other thing to talk about it before I get off my political soapbox, they say that, there are no laws that'll help, because in some of the strictest gun jurisdictions, like big cities, like in states like New York, et cetera, they still have a tremendous amount of gun violence. Well, the reason is because of the proliferation of guns, and the guns are coming from the states that don't have, any gun laws. They're coming up the corridor, whether it's the I-55 corridor in the Midwest going up to Chicago, or the I-95 corridor going up to New York City, among other places, through Baltimore, and places that are suffering from gun violence. I mean, this has happened since I was a prosecutor back in the 80s. in Brooklyn, New York. We still see the same things going on, and it's a doggone shame. That was 35 years ago, and we still see the same thing. And I apologize for monopolizing
Oh,
any
no,
of that
no,
stuff,
no,
but
no,
it's
no. See, here, I let my guests talk.
all right. I
And
appreciate that.
no, because here's the thing, Ms. Elmore. If I wanted to give my own opinion or give, my own thoughts, I don't need a guest to do it. I can just
Yeah.
record myself and put it out. So I don't like shows or interviews where they bring the guest on, ask their thought, and then you're going to debate the guest on his thoughts when you just ask he or she what are their thoughts. So we wanted to make sure here at Interruptions that we don't do that, because I wanted to make sure that Lynn Elmore can give and express his thoughts out, because there are gems in there, right? And I can ask a question and I could swear up and down, okay, he's gonna say this answer, he's gonna agree with me, or whatever, right? And you can have a different perspective, right? That blows my mind, that makes me expand my own thinking and say, okay, I see where he's coming from, and that maybe I need to change my view or thoughts on something. And you can only do that if you allow someone to give their complete thought on a particular question, or whatever. So no, you're not. You're doing. You're fine.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. And as I said, I mean, we're always looking for ways to have impact and reform. I mean, I'm the co-chair of the Knight Commission for Intercollegiate Athletics. And one of the things we want to do is to try to bring back, and you touched on it earlier,
Hmm.
bring back education as the focus of college athletics. I mean, to me, my opportunity was through college athletics. I mean, I probably could have gone to college, maybe City University in New York City, and probably gone on and had a nice career doing something. But the ability to go to the University of Maryland certainly helped me become a pro athlete, but it also helped me prepare myself to be really accepted and graduate from Harvard Law School, to be able to
Yeah,
go
yeah,
out and practice law as a prosecutor in my hometown, to try to bring some order and protection to the folks in my neighborhoods and with neighborhoods where my mother and my sister live. And also to develop an understanding and a knowledge of, the world as we see it today, and to be able to recognize that there are solutions, and to be a part of that, whether it's through business, whether it's through, the bully pulpit, which, I assumed that right now in your show as much as anywhere else, and also through organizations like, the Knight Commission, where we try to bring things into perspective for student athletes who, for better or not, are the leaders of tomorrow, if
correct,
given the right opportunity and presented with the right education. Because I think that athletes are a special breed of folks. We have innate intelligence. We know how to persevere. We
correct,
understand the need for patience and empathy, as well as how to continue to work towards a particular goal.
correct,
Corporations covet athletes because of that mindset that's developed in their abilities to pursue a particular sport. But right now, people are so focused, and it kind of goes back to what you were alluding to
hmm,
before. People are so focused on making the big money, particularly in football and basketball, that they forget what education presents. And I tell folks all the time, I was born and raised, I came from the projects in New York City, in
right,
Brooklyn, New York. My mother graduated from high school in Louisiana and had an offer for a scholarship to Southern University, but couldn't accept it because the family was too poor. She had to go to New York with my aunt, her sister, and clean houses and apartment buildings to send money back. My father dropped out of school in the 10th grade, and ultimately went to war. Was assigned in Japan in occupational forces right at the end of World War II. Came back, was a truck driver. But both of them persevered where they passed civil service
hmm,
exams. My father became a sanitation man in New York. My mother became a clerk, made enough money for us to move out of the projects to
right,
a working class neighborhood in South Queens, where everybody, 95% of us were Black. Everybody
Right.
worked for the government, either the federal government as postmen, or they worked for the city government as firemen and policemen or
Sure.
sanitation. And that's how we strive. And I think that in saying that, I hope people understand, I come from the same place. A lot of folks who complain about where society is right now, the same place they come from.
Right.
And, for them to try to find a way out, you need both, and you can do both. You need
You can do
education
it.
as
Right.
well as the opportunity, if you're good enough, to play professional
And
sports.
that's
You
and
don't
that's
have to give up education to play pro
thank you.
sports.
That's what I was going to say, because I've always tell guys that what if you only play 3 or 4 years and you want to still be connected to the game? You can coach, but the rule is you got to have a college degree to coach.
Yeah.
So had you got that education, then you look at now like a Juwan Howard at the University of Michigan, a Jerry Stackhouse at Vanderbilt, and these are also good academic schools. These are not just fly by night schools, but they both played in the NBA, but they both also got their degrees. And I always tell young athletes, if they paying for it, far as we quote unquote call it free education, then go ahead and get the degree. Whether you play ball and that's all you do and you retire and you ride off in the sunset, that's fine. But you still have that degree just in case if you want to do something else. And so, like, to your point, like I said, just bring the balance. There's nothing wrong with getting the money and all that, but you can get the education, because everybody's not going to play 15, 20 years. Everybody's not going to be a superstar in a prospective sport, because different things and sacrifices you have to make, like you said, in a team sport for the common good of the of the team. And so you may need, or you and I both know, everybody don't love it like that either.
Yeah, no, that's true. But Otis, here's the thing, man. In this world today, athletes in college have to be advocates for their own education. They got to realize that they have the power, particularly the better athletes, and they can use that power to filter down to some of their brethren and some of their sisters who aren't as good as they are. But nevertheless, if you're an advocate for your education in a world that's trying to separate you from that, because their focus is on winning. You talk about NIL.
Right.
And these collectives and stuff, that investment in those kids is not for them to get their education. That investment in them, trying to, bring on the best athletes, et cetera,
Correct.
It's there to try to win.
Yep.
And so, recognizing that at some point, that investment is going to conflict with your education. I can see a point in time, if it continues down the road that it does, that, coaches who probably already do it, but it'll be more acceptable, and alumni will tell a guy or a gal, you want to go to your chemistry class, well, you can't because you fumbled twice yesterday. You got to come back to practice and work on your game, or you missed these free throws. We didn't invest in you to go to, your chemistry class. We invested in you to win basketball games.
Right.
That essentially is what they're saying, and some of them are doing it now, and that's why it's important to be an advocate for your own education and put your foot down and say no. And if there's somebody that you can complain to, and there are, groups and ombudsmen, et cetera, on campuses that you can, if the coach refuses to respect your desire to acquire an education, that you can, report that. I mean, that's one of the things that I emphasize all the time. The young people, be advocates for your education. Now, if you're there not to get an education, you're coming in for 1 year and you're going to leave, there's really nothing I can do except wish you good luck.
Right.
Or if you decide not to go to college and join, one of those things like overtime elite, et cetera, good luck to you. They say that they will invest more money in, if you don't make it to the pros, they'll give you up to $100,000 to pursue your college education. Okay, that's laudable, but it's not sensible, simply because those same kids, if they don't make it by the time they're 18, they're not going to, most of them aren't going to college, because the guys that they played with, the ones who chose to go to college, are now on these campuses in the limelight, on the cover of the press guides, on TV, every night that they play, March Madness, etc. You're gonna go sit in the stands and watch them play when you could have played there. I doubt it. So it's really kind of a false
Yeah.
sense of thinking that you're going to pursue a college education when you're not. But I'm all for teaching a trade or something to make
Right.
folks viable after their sport.
What prompted you to get into broadcasting after being in law? Because that's a that's
Actually, I
a
did it.
pivot.
Actually, I really didn't pivot. It was just, again, the Paul Robeson in me to say I can do a lot of things
Gotcha.
at the same time,
Gotcha.
just as he did. And honestly, I was approached in my second year of law school. I was
Okay.
approached by a producer, the executive producer for ACC basketball, and asked me did I want to do it. Little did I know that I was being considered like one of the first African-American announcers for the ACC.
Yes.
And here I was in Harvard Law School, and it was related to me. It's hearsay, but I'm kind of thinking that the folks who ran the organization wanted me in for an interview because they wanted to make sure that I could speak. And here I was, in my second year at Harvard Law, and I think I could put a couple of sentences together. But it started then, and I just kept doing it. A few games my second year, a few games my third year, and suddenly I got discovered and hired by CBS while I was practicing law. So that was something that I enjoyed simply because I enjoyed the game. I was still close to it, still had a name, and that's those are the ingredients for announcers today. I'm pretty sure that my career is over after 30 some odd years of doing college basketball. I did some NBA as well when CBS had the NBA, but I took 5 years off because I thought once again that I could help, and having so many stories related to me of guys who were getting defrauded by their agents and guys with no direction. I took 5 years off from my announcing to be a sports agent, which had a reasonable amount of success. 7 first-round picks in 5 years, top football picks, a couple of Olympic gold medalists. But because the money, particularly in basketball, got so big,
Right.
people were willing to do anything to get their clients, including pay them under the table.
I was about to say,
the stuff that's going on now above the table with NIL was going on under the table back then.
I remember because I was doing sports management and I stopped to just focus on the podcast because of what you said. I never understood, Lynn, it's like I always use this example. If a man is coming to cut your grass, he's coming to provide a service, but he's going to pay you money so you can allow him to do a service for you. Like that never made sense to me. I'm gonna pay the player to sign with me so I can do him a good service. Like it didn't make sense to me.
You're right, and it still doesn't make sense, but people do it because what it does, it kind of overshadows and obscures maybe their lack of ability and talent, their lack of a message, a lack of vision. And all they do is pay these guys. Now what happens is, once they paid them, especially back in my day, during the early mid-90s, is that, suddenly when the player realizes that there wasn't an awful lot to this particular agent, the agent would blackmail him and say, look, if you leave me, I'm going to go tell everybody that you took money while you're in school. Now you're indicting the institution, and they ultimately go on probation, lose whatever success that they had in the NCAA tournament, et cetera, et cetera. I saw that happen to a number of guys during that particular time. But I also said to myself, I'm not going to risk my license. I'm not going to risk my reputation in trying to do the same thing and compete with these guys. So, after 5 years, I decided it was time to leave, and went on to some other things.
I wish I would have had that common sense. I stuck. Well, no, I stuck in it longer than I should have. Had some success with some former NFL players, and I have two former clients that I still talk to this day, and and give them advice of whatever I can. So it's but this is really what I'm doing now is really what I'm supposed to been doing, because
Yeah, that's
when I
great.
graduated high school, John Madden inspired me so much. I wanted to be the next John Madden. I wanted to be Stuart Scott before Stuart Scott. And I've always and that's how I discovered you when you were covering the ACC and working for CBS and the NBA, because at that time, as you know, the big voice was Dick Vitale, and the NCAA. It was like it was a perfect marriage. All of the TV, all of it was coming together at the same time. The NCAA tournament was getting bigger. The TV coverage was, and then Duke was emerging all at the same time. Like all this stuff was at the same time, and I always enjoyed watching you call the games, and so for you commentated one of the, if not the greatest college game that was ever played, between Duke and Kentucky, uh
Oh, you
where
must have missed. You must have missed Maryland against NC State when I played in it. No, I'm just kidding.
I was a little. Get mad at mom and dad. I didn't get
No,
to. I know.
you're only 3 years old, man.
But hey, your Terps did with Gary Williams became a thorn in my side, because I ended up growing up a Duke fan, and those teams that Gary put together. I listen, when I was glad to see Stevie Franchise. I always still call him Stevie Franchise. I was glad to see him go. I was glad to see Juan Dixon go, Blake go. I was like, these guys need to go. But what was that like for you, calling that game, that up and down seesaw between Duke and Kentucky?
Well, I mean, at the time, to me, it was work, but it was enjoyable work,
Right.
and really didn't see the import and recognize the space that it would assume
Hmm.
until a little bit after.
Okay.
But during the game, I really thought, and I made the comment that watching these guys, with Grant Hill,
Hmm.
and Jamal Mashburn, guys that kind of transcended positions. They could rebound, they could shoot it, they could put it on the floor. Plus, they had size. Six
Right.
six, 6'7". You couldn't really dictate a position. And the same thing with a guy like Leitner, who could shoot it from the outside, play inside, that type of thing. I said, this is the turning point in how this game is going to be played, because now we have these guys who are so versatile in what they do. And certainly, watching the game go back and forth, and,
Hmm.
the ultimate shot by Leitner,
Hmm.
the pass by Grant Hill, you could sit there and pick apart the strategy. Why didn't Rick Pitino put a guy on the ball?
Right.
How did Christian Leitner get away with stomping
Stomping. Yeah.
Timberlake in the chest? Because back in the day, man, I don't know, my man might not have made it out of that game, and neither would I if he had done that to my teammate. But you recognize all of those different things, and certainly you saw the supremacy of Duke, because I think that was the first of two in a row for them,
Yeah.
or pretty close to it.
No, that was the
Uh,
first one. Yeah.
yeah, after they went on to go to the Final Four, winning that game, and ultimately won the championship. So you saw a lot of change in that one game, which, as I said, in retrospect, you start to realize how important it truly was. And then the suddenness of the end, and that's what makes it, a great game, the greatest game to a lot of people's minds. The long pass, the shot at the buzzer by a guy who was perfect from the field. You
Yeah.
know that
Perfect from
that
the
kind
field.
of stuff. That
And
kind of
like you
stuff.
said, didn't get kicked out, because
Yeah.
had he got kicked out, that would have changed
Oh, no question.
the dynamic. So by him staying, and people forget, he was perfect. He hadn't missed a shot the
Right.
whole game, whether it was a shot, a free throw. He was perfect in that sense in that game. And so for you to
And you
be
had
there to
two,
call it.
and I was gonna say, you had two coaches who were, essentially bordering on greatness. Certainly, we know what Mike Krzyzewski meant to the game and his success. And Rick Pitino just showed off, obviously, his prowess, where
Right.
he could coach some teams, win some championships with different teams. So it was a kind of confluence of so many great beginnings for college basketball and helped college basketball grow into what it is today for a lot of folks. So,
And I
you know,
always preferred college basketball over the NBA.
yeah, yeah, and I kind of still do because you had the fallibility of young men meeting the perspective of some guy somewhere rising to the occasion, playing beyond themselves, or some team playing beyond themselves for that one particular game, particularly in a one and done
I
type
love it
situation. That's the beauty of that game.
because it reminds me of playing on the playground where there's no 3 out of 5, 2 out of 3. You and I both know you got to keep winning, because if you lose, there's no telling when you're gonna get back on the court.
Yeah, if you go on a good playground, you go where the
You,
comp is. You got to stay, man, because if you don't, you might as well go home, eat lunch, eat dinner, and come back because you're not getting back on the
you
court.
get back on the court. And I love the fact that if you got game, bring it today. None of this, okay, well, we'll close them out at home, or
Yeah.
you got game. And I always tell people that's why college basketball and football is such great sports, because it's the one game elimination. You got to bring it today. If Lynn Elmore doesn't have his best game today, then I better take up the slack, because if not, we're going home.
Yeah, exactly. And it has happened. It's happened. Hey man, I know we've taken up a lot of your time.
No, I just
You've
had
been
a, I
here.
just had I just had a couple of more questions.
All right, go for it.
All right. So one of the things about you, man, well, that'll be my last question. I want to get your thoughts on this. What is how do you feel about the coverage of sports, in a sense of when they covered Colin Kaepernick, Kyrie Irving, and Kwame Brown, the narratives that they put on these young athletes, as far as hijacking Colin Kaepernick's message, people having an outrage because Kyrie didn't want to get vaccinated. And then Kwame Brown, people putting that narrative that he was a bust when the man played like 13 years in the NBA.
Well, I mean, we can take each of them individually. I mean, with Colin Kaepernick, obviously, there's a transgression there. He was supposed to shut up and play.
Right.
Instead of taking a position that ultimately he became a leader in taking a position. You talk about, again, activists. I mean, he's a true activist because he sacrificed to get a message across, and that message resonated. And the establishment just didn't like it, couldn't go for it. And so, the establishment in many ways controls a lot of the media. Certainly, it leaks out in many instances where people get the true story and people are able to galvanize behind him and support him and support the message. But like you said, they hijacked it because what he was saying was true. It wasn't he was demonstrating against first responders or the military or anyone like that. He was taking a position, taking a knee in order to demonstrate respect. And he was advised to do so by a Green Beret, a decorated person who was in combat.
Correct.
And said that that's how we respect our fallen brothers. And Colin Kaepernick was respecting our fallen brothers at the hands of police, et cetera. It wasn't a demonstration against police, just against the action. But, the president of the United States at the time and the media jumped and followed it, contorted and really changed that message. And mainstream America, I'm so disappointed in the lack of education and the willingness to follow conspiracy theories and not look behind facts. Mainstream America picked up on it, although eventually I think a majority of folks started to realize what Colin Kaepernick really meant.
Sure.
But again, being blackballed by the NFL for so long, up until now, he finally got his opportunity. It was a doggone shame. Now, when you
Right.
talk about Kyrie,
Mm-hmm.
to me, Kyrie's a different, that's a different situation. I mean, here's a young man that is supremely talented, extraordinarily gifted intellectually,
Mm-hmm.
understands what he's doing, but I think he takes these positions
Mm-hmm.
in a way that, he wants the attention.
Gotcha.
There's a certain level of narcissism in Kyrie Irving. And quite honestly, in a sense where on one hand, he talks about the greater good and what's happening to people, et cetera, I think it's pretty selfish not to be vaccinated. As I said, supremely intelligent. I know he probably knew better that vaccination is more helpful than
Mm-hmm.
harmful. But
Right.
nevertheless, he was taking a stand because he could afford it. And
Mm.
that set him apart from everybody. I was very disappointed in him, quite honestly, and I was disappointed in the Nets because they fell for it. They tried to reach an accommodation, so they would only pay him half the money because they said he couldn't play. So therefore, that gave him somewhat of an out. But I also think they recognize, the type of person he is, and that's why they're balking at possibly signing him. They may get ultimately pressed into having to sign him because,
Right.
as I said, he's an extraordinary talent. But the fact that they're, having second thoughts tells you something
Correct.
about him. And the thing about Kwame Brown, that's just, so-called experts. You can't listen to him. Like you said, he had a long career in the NBA. It's not his fault that he was drafted number one. That, you want to talk about a bust. It was, unfortunately, and he hasn't had many failures, but that was Michael Jordan's failure in
Correct.
scouting and recognizing the true talent level of this young man. And maybe also, Kwame Brown didn't play with the teams that ultimately could bring out the best in him.
Right.
I've seen a lot of talented guys go with the wrong systems
Yep.
and never really able to blossom because it wasn't a system that would showcase their best talents and their best side. Not everybody can play for every situation.
Correct.
I've been a victim of that myself.
Right.
Not being I wasn't the number one pick, but there were some teams that I could fit in with and play really well, and other teams where I didn't get the chance to show what I could do or
Because
what
it
I
didn't
could do
suit you.
didn't fit. Right.
Right.
It didn't fit me. So I Kwame Brown, I feel bad for him because he has to hear that. But I think that his intestinal fortitude, listening to him, he knows who he is.
And that's what I
He
like. Yeah.
he sometimes fights against it and has to speak out against it, but he knows who he is, and he's living a life where he can go out and be proud of who he was and the effort that he gave and stand on it, notwithstanding what everybody else is saying. Everybody wants to be, thought of in the most positive sense, but that's not always going to be the case, and that's why you have to have that internal strength, and hopefully he will continue to have that.
My
So that's my
final
spiel on those three.
no, that was good. My final question for you is everything that you have done and continue to still do to this day, what motivated you and what inspired you to do everything that you have accomplished and the things that you're still doing to this day?
Well, I guess in part what motivates me is to, see what my parents and, my grandparents and folks had to overcome, and in order for me to be in this position. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I have my ups and downs too.
Right.
I've made some critical judgment mistakes, but I've been able to recover from them. That motivates me, and what motivates me is going forward. I've got two sons who are, in my mind, very talented. They were athletes, but maybe not good enough to be pros, but good enough. One, went to Princeton, played baseball, and
Right.
wound up getting a degree from there and a master's degree from the Citadel in sports management, played basketball for them. I
Okay.
had another son who was a good high school player, decided not to play at Columbia University, got his degree and got an MBA.
Okay.
Both of them are in business right now, doing well. One is married and about to start a family, and the other is contemplating marriage. What motivates me and motivated me in the past is to be a better example for them.
Gotcha.
I wasn't perfect, but I
Right.
think I kind of set a tone for them to recognize how important education is and to balance education and sports. Both of them stay involved in sports. As I said, one coaches young women
Okay.
because he thinks boys don't listen. He coached boys as well, but they don't listen, in his
Gotcha.
part-time. And the other works for a major bank that has sport and entertainment as part of their global financial management. So, they understand the balance and the importance of sport. And that's another thing that, as I said, that motivated me to do many of the things that I've done. And then finally, all those experiences that I've had, not only
Sure.
in sports, not only in business, broadcasting, and certainly in the law, have given me an awful lot of institutional knowledge that at this stage in my life, I just turned 70 years old. I still have an opportunity to pass on that institutional knowledge to the next group of leaders, as I call them, C-suite dwellers, and hopeful that through sports and through the business of sports, that they can have positive impact on where we are today, recognizing how tightly woven sports is in our social fabric.
Yes.
And how important it is. So, those are the things that get me up every morning, keep me excited. And, I'm just enjoying life. My wife and I are trying to figure out ways where we can kind of, sit back and chill a little bit and enjoy the fruits of our labor. But, it's still fun to get up in the morning and to tackle these things.
Well, I thank you for coming on the show, Mr. Elmore, and blessing me with your presence and taking time out to talk with me and share wisdom. So I thank you once again. Keep doing what you're doing. You're a treasure to our community. And the great part about it is that you will always just being yourself. So thank you. Continue blessings with your family and everything, all the endeavors that you do. And we love you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for the time. Give me a great opportunity to get a bunch of stuff off my chest. So I really appreciate it.
No problem. Peace.
Thanks.